Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're very excited about this event and glad to have you all here as a part of it. I want to start by saying who I am. I am Dr. Andrea Chapdelaine, the president of Hood College. We are glad to welcome, thank you. We're glad to welcome so many of our faculty, yay students, I see you out there, go guys, as well as members of our Board of Trustees. We are right in the middle of our Board of Trustees meeting, so glad to have you all here. Lots of special guests. And we also want to give a special shout out. We have with us members of the classes at Frederick Community College and Mount St. Mary's who are participating in their cybersecurity programs there. I'm sure as many know in the audience, we entered into what I would say is a very unique and distinctive agreement where we have set up a pipeline for students interested in this field to move seamlessly from the associate's program at Frederick Community College into the bachelor's program at the Mount, and then, of course, the icing on the cake to come to Hood for the master's degree. So it's a very exciting program, and those students had the distinct privilege to interact with our speaker earlier today, and I know it was a very engaging conversation, so excited about that. And finally, I want to say a special thank you to our trustee, Janet Cotton, who her and her husband, John, are the ones who have funded and supported this wonderful speaker series. So can you join me in a round of applause for her? I don't see Janet, but there she is. Thank you, Janet. It is now my honor to introduce our speaker with us tonight, Dr. Ron Ross. Dr. Ross is a fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. At NIST, Dr. Ross leads the Federal Information Security Modernization Act implementation, I got that out, which includes development of security standards and guidelines for federal government, subcontractors, and U.S. critical infrastructure. He also leads the Joint Task Force Interagency Partnership with the Department of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, and Committee on National Security Systems. In addition, Dr. Ross supports the U.S. State Department and international outreach for information and critical infrastructure security. Dr. Ross is a graduate of West Point and served in the Army for 20 years. He served as a White House aide during that time, as well as a senior technical advisor to the Army. He is also a graduate of the Defense Systems Management College, where he received a master's and Ph.D. in computer science, also from the Navy Postgraduate School, with a focus on artificial intelligence and robotics. And I think we'll hear the story of how that became a career in cybersecurity. While assigned to the National Security Administration, he received the Scientific Achievement Award and Defense Superior Service Medal. He also received the Federal 100 Award 4 times and the Presidential Rank Award, Department of Commerce Gold and Silver Medal Awards, and is a Distinguished Fellow of the Information Systems Security Association Hall of Fames. And that's only a very small part of the list of the awards and recognitions he's received for his amazing career. Dr. Ross, on behalf of the entire Hood community, we thank you for your service to our nation, and we welcome you to Hood. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that great welcome. I'm going to be 68 years old on my next birthday, and these introductions sound more like eulogies now than they... I'm not liking that too much, but thank you so much for that. What a great treat and honor it is for me to be here today. I didn't expect to be able to meet with the students. I met with them for an hour. That's been the highlight of the trip. I love interacting with students because they're our future. All those folks who are here pursuing those very difficult degrees, we need every one of you because the country is in big trouble. You're going to hear a lot of happy talk from some of the people in Washington, D.C. about how we're conquering the cyber attacks and yeah, things are bad, but they're getting better. We desperately need every one of you to be in this fight because the future of the country is at stake. And I hope tonight I'll be able to give you a few tidbits about why cybersecurity is important, why it's so difficult, and why we need you, each one of you, to join this great team and to do something really great for the country. So with that, we shared a lot of stories. In fact, when I met with that hour earlier with the students, I think I used a lot of my material, so I apologize if I'm going to repeat some things you're going to hear again. But let's start out. I'm going to tell you a story tonight first, because in order to understand about cybersecurity, you can get down to the nits and the firewalls and the software and the configurations and all the details. But there's a bigger story here that needs to be told first, and that's what I want to try to do tonight. We're living in an age that is unprecedented. We're building literally the greatest information technology infrastructure ever in the history of mankind. It's given us great functionality, and every one of you are carrying an iPhone or an Android device or have a tablet, except one person I met tonight who carries a flip phone still. I'm not sure where you're. He's right here, okay. Yeah, believe it or not, there is someone carrying a flip phone. And it's just an incredible journey. I was telling the students earlier, my first computer I interacted with was about 50 years ago. And I stood in line at the college with a deck of cards that you had to punch the computer programs in. Some of you graybeards out there nodding your head. And then you put the card in the card reader, and then you come back the next day after you get your printout and you missed a comma, and you'd have to go back and do it all over again. And you kind of look at where we've come from there to where we are today. It's an amazing thing. One of the things that's important to recognize is because our technology is so good and so compelling and we use it, we're addicted to it, that's also given us a huge blind spot in the country today. We're building a very functionally capable infrastructure, but it's also highly vulnerable. And these computers today, we're literally pushing computers to the edge. I use that term to indicate computers are going into everything from dishwashers to automobiles, to power plants, to pacemakers in your chest with wireless access, by the way. You want to make sure you know who your friends are in that case. But the current landscape in cyber, it's a very dangerous world that we're living in because we are totally dependent upon this technology for everything that's important. And in order for us to have the same peace of mind, I use the term peace of mind when I get in airplanes or when I cross a bridge in the DC area. The New Wilson Bridge is an example. I cross the bridge and I fly a lot in Southwest and other airlines, and I have a lot of confidence that I can cross the bridge and I can get to the other side and I can fly in the airplane and everything's going to be okay. Now, occasionally bridges collapse. In fact, I was at one in Minnesota one time when it did collapse, right from the University of Minnesota. Airplanes crash occasionally, but when that happens, we know we can go to root cause analysis. We can understand what happened and we can fix it. But most of the time, they're highly trustworthy and reliable. Think about how we build our software and our systems today. We're not using the best practices in software engineering and systems engineering and mathematics and electrical engineering. We have the ability, the knowledge, and the skills to do better. And that's one of my messages tonight, is we can do better and we have to do better, because no matter where you are today, that computer is going to affect some part of your life, whether it's privacy related or security related. So we talk about, I like to use just numbers on slides. I don't like PowerPoints. I hate PowerPoint to begin with, but I hate PowerPoint slides that have just lots and lots of words on them. So you're going to see very simple stuff tonight. 242. That's how old our country is. Our last birthday, July the 4th, 242 years old. And we've defended our country in the kinetic space for 242 years and done it very, very well. But today, what we're seeing is a massive convergence in cyber and physical systems. You might have heard the term Internet of Things, where everything now is being connected to everything else, all those devices around your house, in your car. And all of that is making the kinetic world highly unreliable, highly untrustworthy, because those computers now are controlling everything on the physical side. And so your automobile, we've had hackers that can hack into your braking system and they can shut your brakes off or lock them up while you're going 70 miles an hour down Interstate 70 coming to Frederick. We can hack into the GPS system, so when people are navigating on the open seas, You can change their navigation by 1 degree every hour, so they think they're going the right direction, but the ship is going way off course. Our power plants, and I'll talk about this a little later, what the adversaries can do to us. It's a pretty daunting thing, but the good news is, and this is why I love coming out to colleges like Hood and all the affiliates that are here tonight, it's a great thing because when I talk to the students today, first of all, I noticed something different. They were happy, which I don't remember being that happy in college, but they were happy and they were engaged, and you can see in their eyes there was not a lot of cynicism and kind of like downer stuff. They were engaged. They were into it. You could see the future in those students, and that's a great thing. That is our future because I'm moving off the stage pretty soon. I'll be sitting in my chair at home with my adopted pit bull watching NASCAR races, which I love to do. And all of you are going to be carrying the ball forward in the future. So we have to learn as a country how to defend ourselves in kinetic space. This is a problem for the military. Every segment, I'll talk about the military problems later on, but they have an especially difficult problem now. There is a big difference in kinetic space and cyberspace. Why is cybersecurity so difficult today? Because we sure talk about it a lot. There's no shortage of discussing the issue, right? It happens in every boardroom, in schools, universities around the country. We know the problems are there, but yet it's a very difficult problem to solve. And why is that? Well, I try to compare kinetic space and cyberspace. If you can remember back on 9/11, most of us remember where we were on 9/11 when the attacks at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. You can kind of internalize a kinetic attack. You can see it, you can feel it, you can internalize it. It's kind of etched in your brain. But cyber attacks happen below the radar, below the waterline. It's kind of like having cancer in the early stages. You have one cancer cell, and it doubles at a certain rate, and then eventually it'll take over and kill you. It takes over the critical organs, and just you're dead. But it flies below the radar. You're walking around feeling just fine. That's what cyber attacks are like, because most of the devastation that occurs today could already be happening in your system, because they launch an attack and their mission is to either steal stuff from you or to bring down your capability. There's two choices they have. And they could be doing one or the other for various reasons. We'll talk about why they would do each one of those coming up. But we have to do better. In pushing computers to the edge, you know, there was a big cyber attack about 2 years ago. You remember this. It was the mirror attack where they co-opted over 1 million devices in your houses, things like baby monitors and DVRs and good old Alexa. All those things in your house have default passwords, and the bad guys know that those passwords are set to 0, 0, 0, 0. And what do? They put in the password, they take over Alexa or your dishwasher or your refrigerator or your DVR, and then they will take that device and they will send information through that device times 1 million. And it ended up in the largest distributed denial of service attack ever. It took down the Krebs website. He's a security researcher. And it also took down a third of the internet. Can you imagine that? The eastern seaboard. That's just one group of bad guys who figured out how weak the technology is. That's why we have to do better, because we can't tolerate that kind of exfiltration. The director of NSA, it wasn't General Alexander who was here last time at the first lecture. It was one of his predecessors said that the United States is losing about $1 trillion a year. That's with a T, of intellectual property. This is stuff that's coming out of Silicon Valley, our Fortune 500 companies. All of that research and development that our companies invest in, which gives us cutting-edge technology for the warfighters or the next generation of smartphones or any of the innovations that we enjoy today, all of that technology is being stolen by cyber attacks. And that is a recipe for disaster. That's why national security and economic security run neck and neck today. You can't distinguish the two, because if you don't protect your critical infrastructure and you don't protect your industry and your federal government, then the adversaries don't have to win on the battlefield anymore. They can take you down right here, right now, in this country, in our neighborhoods, right where we are today. And that's a totally different thing than we've ever had to experience in the world defending the country the first 242 years. So you'll hear a lot about complexity. This is our number one threat. You'll hear a lot of people from NSA and DHS talking about their top threats and all that. This is the number one threat to our systems and our infrastructure. They're just too doggone complicated. We were talking over dinner about, I call this the stack. Those of you who are in computer science or engineering understand the concept of the stack. It's the applications, it's the middleware, it's the operating system, it's the firmware and the integrated circuits out to the network. That's the stack. The adversary is playing in all of those environments. How many folks remember just a couple of days ago, they announced that in the supply chain, they think that one of our adversaries implanted malicious code in a very, very deep part of the system that made its way into some of our big cloud providers. And somebody asked me at the student meeting today, is that true? I can't tell you if it's true or not, but I can tell you it's possible. If they can do it, they will. And this is the part of risk management. When you're dealing with critical assets, you don't figure out, well, what's the likelihood they're going to do that to me? You have to look at the fact they can do it to you. And if they can do it to you, they will do it to you. You know, one of the things I talk about a lot is I've been around for a long time, and I'm a big fan of NASA and NASCAR for different reasons, but they have a common denominator. And one of the things the reason I love coming to colleges and universities and dealing with students and faculty and just talking to people is I remember back in 1961, we were in what they used to call a hot missile race with the old Soviet Union. Now, many of you were not even born during those days, but some of you graybeards remember what I'm talking about. The Soviet Union had a lead on the United States in missile technology. They had built a whole range of nuclear weapons, and we were at risk. So we had to develop what we call the nuclear triad, and we were behind in missile technology. So the President Kennedy, this was a very famous speech, and you still see clips of it today. He said, we're going to go to the moon and do other things before the end of this decade, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Now, what was that? That was a motivational speech. That was a challenge to the best and the brightest of the American people, government, industry, and the academic community. Existential threat, kinetic existential threat. And what do? 8 years later, this is hard to believe, instead we landed the first man on the moon. That was July the 20th, 1969. I remember it like it was yesterday because I was a plebe at West Point. I'd only been there 20 days. Didn't even know where all the bathrooms were yet. And they woke us up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they marched all 4,400 cadets to a big auditorium like this, a little bigger, and we watched the first moon landing. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. And every day I go out, whenever I see a full moon out there, I look up there and say, wow, we've had people up there. How awesome is that? And we did this with 1950s and early 1960s computing technology. That's good engineering. We didn't have all this fancy computer stuff back then, but we put a bunch of people on the moon. What we have to do today is recognize that we have an existential threat in cyber. And this is something that every leader, from the President of the United States on down the line, have to recognize the threat, have to understand our huge blind spot that we've built because of our addiction to the technology, and we have to change course and do things a little differently. Otherwise, we're going down, and it's not a pleasant thought. But we've seen it. I've seen a lot of intelligence data. When you have a top secret clearance, you get access to a lot of stuff, and you can see the targets of opportunity. We know who the adversaries are. We know who they're attacking. We know how successful they've been, and we have a lot of concerns out there. So, again, I tell you this not to scare you, because this is to motivate you. The field that you've chosen and the great program that they've set up at the college here with this transitional program from the associates to the bachelor's to the master's degree, you are going to be grounded in the fundamentals. And you are absolutely picking the greatest field to be in. And if you can develop a passion for that field, you will never work a day in your life. You'll be like an old guy like me at 68 who should have been retired long ago, but I'm still out here doing it because I really love what I do. And that's the bigger message tonight that I want to leave you with. But this complexity is also attack surface. Attack surface sounds like a very fancy term. What it really is is it's your Alexa, it's your refrigerator, it's everything in your house that has all of that great computer technology. That equals attack surface. We're building more complex things, and it gives the adversary more opportunity to attack whatever we hold dear and use that either to bring down a capability directly or, like we talked about with that mirror attack, to bring it down indirectly. You're part of an attack that you don't even realize. And that's got to change. This is a natural phenomenon. You can see the culture that we have today. We are a culture of smartphones and tablets. And it's very difficult. You know, on your smartphone, you can literally download hundreds of applications. Now, I got my government-issued smartphone about 3 years ago. I tell this story a lot because it's kind of an interesting story. I'm a cybersecurity guy. I get issued a brand new smartphone at NIST. And I asked my CISO, I said, well, what can we download to this smartphone? He says, only download mission-essential applications. I said, well, that makes sense to me. So I'm going to a movie with my wife, Connie. She's here in the front row. Been married 38 years, by the way, and thank you very much for that. Yeah. And we're sitting waiting for the movie to start, and the announcer comes on and says, you can download an app for your smartphone right now that will tell you the optimal time to go to the restroom in the movie you're about to see. I said, wow, that's awesome. I mean, and it's a real app. It's called, well, we're among friends here, right? So it's called Run P. That's what the app is. You can go out to the Play Store, to Google, you can, the Apple Store. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, mission essential or not. So if you're 20 years, if you're one of these students here, that's not a mission essential application. But if you're 68 years old, that's a mission essential application. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But what it illustrates is something very important. We are all part of this addiction to the technology, and it does give us a huge blind spot. There's something called whitelisting. I was talking to Jeff earlier. He's up in the booth there now. He does all the technology here. And there's a term called whitelisting. What it means is that you only allow people to run things that you say they can run. You limit the applications, the executables on that computer, and what it does is it doesn't allow malicious code to run either. Now, people hate that because you can't download that really cool app that tells you when to go to the restroom, There's all these things. There's an app for everything today. And the point is, if you look at that smartphone, I call that the great black box. It could be a tablet, a smartphone, a laptop, a supercomputer. It's a big black box to you because you don't really know what's going on inside there, but the adversaries do. They know exactly what's going on, and they can take advantage of us. We have to get better, more disciplined, more structured. We have to bring our engineering techniques and concepts, things that we've known for 40 years, and we've got some new NIST publications where we're bringing that system security engineering focus back so we can build our software and our systems just like we build our bridges and our airplanes, so we can have trust and confidence in those things. So that's one of the problems. This is another problem. Big data. By the way, I do all my own slides, and I learned how to animate my slides during the government shutdown 3 years ago. Because when the government shuts down, we are forbidden under penalty of law of working. We can't touch our smartphones or our laptops. And for me, when they tell me I can't work, that's like torture. I'm sitting there looking at the walls and, so I figured I would, as taxpayers, you're paying my salary, I would go back and learn how to animate. So that's, you'll see a lot of animation. That's me doing my new thing. But we've got big data everywhere. You have a digital footprint just because you're on the grid, and you can't operate today being off the grid. I was talking to the students earlier. I said, how long can you go without having any money in your wallet? I did that experiment. It lasted 3 months for me. I went 3 months without having one piece of currency in my wallet. My record came to an end on the Dulles Toll Road at a toll booth that didn't take credit cards and didn't have a fast pass. So I had no money, so I had to go through, and they took my picture, and I got a ticket, and I had to pay it a week later. But you can literally go through your entire life now never seeing money. You get direct deposit. It's all bits flying around this great internet of things. And so big data is here. I was telling the story earlier about we have a travel system where I can make reservations online. I travel a lot. So I made a trip to Huntsville, Alabama about a month ago. And I flew into Nashville because that's the closest Southwest city, and Connie makes me get Southwest points, so I have to fly a Southwest all the time. So I flew into Nashville, and well, I made my reservations, and then on your profile, you can list whoever you want. I list my secretary because she's got to do the actual execution of the travel order. And I list Connie because she wants to know where I am all the time. So within 30 minutes of that, they sent an email to her Gmail account. Now, she hadn't even opened up that Gmail email, and she was already getting spam saying great things to do in Nashville, Tennessee, and in Huntsville, Alabama. Now, how does that happen without her opening the email? Well, the answer is that Google is scanning your emails. They're data mining. And they're doing that because somewhere along the line, you pushed, yes, I agree. Now, think about the next time you download an app for your smartphone, and it asks you, in order to install this app, you've got to click yes on 30 things. You have no idea what you're answering. You could be giving away your firstborn child, and you wouldn't really know. You see, that's the black box. You don't know what's going on inside there, and that's a very dangerous thing because as more of this data gets collected by a small number of groups or companies or the federal government, whoever it is, information is power. And the more you lose that, you lose your sense of identity and you lose your sense of self. And that gets to the very one word when people ask me why I'm still doing cybersecurity today at my ripe old age is because it's about freedom. I know it sounds a little bit quaint, but if you lose your security and your privacy, freedom is not far behind. And I'll show you how that all works a little bit later. But big data, keep an eye on it because we're collecting literally gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes. What comes after petabytes? One of you computer science person. Yeah, exabytes, thank you. We're going to run out of names, but not of data. We just keep building bigger and better stuff. And it gets cheaper, by the way, as over time, which is a good thing. That's the black box. Be careful of that. Let's talk a little bit about the critical infrastructure. I just listed 4 of the 18. And when we talk about defending the country now, it's not just about defending the country with the military, because now there's something called asymmetric warfare. Some guy, some terrorist with a laptop 10,000 miles away can do great damage to a power plant or the Pentagon or one of our defense contractors or some company in Silicon Valley just because they're connected over this great thing called the internet. We built the internet a long time ago. We never thought anything about security. Why? Because it was a tool used in the academic community among students, people who are not malicious actors, to share information. And from there, everything is history now. The internet's become the vehicle for how we communicate globally. So it's about managing risk, cyber risk today. And there are 4 components of any risk management process or assessment process where we talk about threat. Those are the bad guys. We talk about vulnerabilities. We talk about the impact to your mission or your business, and that could be anything. It could be the mission of the college. It could be the mission of the Pentagon, the military mission of the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines. It could be the mission of the power plant to deliver safe and effective power to the grid. Every company has a mission, and it's valuable. It's important to a certain segment. And likelihood, we used to use the likelihood component. How likely is it they're actually going to do something to me? So I see the threat. I know I have the vulnerability. I know what the mission impact is. How likely is that? Today it's 100%, especially if you're a high-value asset or a high-value target. I was at NASA Goddard earlier today, speaking there. They are a high-value target because that's our space program. All of the technology that sent those great astronauts to the moon, it's all developed in NASA Goddard and those space centers around the United States. And now we have worldwide partners. The International Space Station, we partner up with many, many countries. They also have to protect their assets as well to make sure we can defend our country and also they can defend their countries as well. So when you get a chance, these are great things to download from the internet. There's 3 publications here, and I highly recommend this to all the students who are in the cybersecurity program and the faculty as well. The one that you really want to focus on is the very first one. This is a Defense Science Board report in 2013. It's been quite a few years now. And the Department of Defense asked the Defense Science Board, could the United States military withstand a massive cyber attack and still defend the country? That's a pretty important question. And when they came back, they described the different layers of vulnerabilities that we have in our systems with all this complexity. And there were actually 6 different layers, but I'm going to collapse to 3 to make the point. The first layer is called known vulnerabilities, and you all are very familiar with those. I'm sure Jeff deals with those all the time here at the college. The big companies, every Tuesday, we call it Patch Tuesday. They announce their latest patches. Why? Because they've discovered something in their code that needs to be fixed. It's a vulnerability. It can be exploited by an adversary. So you run around and you try to patch all the known vulnerabilities. The next layer below that, something we call zero-day vulnerabilities or zero-day exploits. Now, those of you who are not cybersecurity folks, a zero-day is the kind of attack, I call it the sucker punch. It's when the adversaries discover something about your system or your network that you don't know about. They discover a vulnerability. And the reason they call it 0 days, you get no notice. They just launch the attack. Now, that's a very serious class of vulnerabilities because we don't know what we don't know. And the number of 0-day vulnerabilities is growing exponentially because of the complexity. And you can see where this story is headed, right? There's a layer below that. There's a term called the advanced persistent threat. These are nation-state level adversaries. They could be going after the United States voting system. They can be going after our defense industry. Advanced persistent threat, these are people who are very highly skilled and educated. A lot of them have Ph.D.s, computer science, and they are legions of these attackers are actually breaching a system, installing malicious code, and then exfiltrating. They can actually create new vulnerabilities that you never had before. That's pretty devastating. Now, if you how many people remember the OPM breach that happened a couple years ago? I'll talk about that in a minute, but 2/3 of these vulnerability classes, the 0 days and the ones the adversary creates, are totally off our radar today. Even our best scanning tools can't find them all. That's why we have to go back to what I call building better bridges, building better airplanes. Only we got to build better systems, systems that we can trust. Not perfect systems, but systems that are more trustworthy and more resilient. Resilient systems mean systems that can withstand the cyber attack and still continue to operate and support the mission. That's important in a lot of sectors today, like a power plant, financial sector, our voting systems. You know, certain things are just, they rise to another level. It's not like your smartphone or your tablet going down. That's an irritation. When you lose power for 3 or 4 months and you can't replace those because they fried your generators, that's a showstopper today. And we just can't have those kind of situations. So we know the adversaries are relentless. We know a lot about what they do. We know a lot about their tradecraft because we study it all the time. And so we understand those attack vectors that are coming at us. When adversaries attack, they can do 3 things to you. They can steal things from you. That's what happened at OPM. They took all the SF-86 data, all the security clearance information. They can also pre-position malicious code. This is the nightmare scenario that we're dealing with right now with all of our power plants in the electric grid. We know several of the nation-state adversaries have been probing our power plant, our systems. But what we don't know is if they've been successful at pre-positioning malicious code. Now, you might think, well, why would they install malicious code if they're not going to bring you down right now? Well, the answer is that you may be more worth to them more in an upstate than in downstate. They may want to wait until that exact time in a coordinated attack that could spread across the entire electric grid, maybe in concert with some military operations or some other international event that may be happening. So pre-positioning a malicious code is a very serious thing, and we don't know everything that we don't know because there's just so much complexity in all these systems, and that's a very troubling area. The last thing, they can just bring you down. Just imagine on 9/11 if there was a simultaneous cyber attack. We had literally the FAA brought down over 6,000 airplanes within an hour on 9/11. Can you imagine that? That was an awesome task. If they had lost their command and control of the airspace during that with a cyber attack, those pilots would be flying blind. And we didn't know if there were 4 planes or 40 planes on 9/11. We just didn't know. It was happening in real time. So that's the danger of losing your capability. So let me just give you a couple of war stories here and kind of personalize this for you, because that's the way it always makes sense to most people. 2015 was a bad year for me, personally, and Connie. OPM happened. The adversary got in and stole 22.5 million records of the most sensitive information that we keep on any individual. It was all of the information that goes into my background investigation when they're going to give me a top secret clearance. And a lot of you who are retired military or you have grants that require clearances, you know exactly what that is. It's got everything in there about my family. It goes back many, many years, and my kids are in there. That was really bad. And it was very serious, 22.5 million records. The next thing that happened that same year, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm a federal employee, so my health records and all my family's health records are in that database, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they went in there and they took all that information. The only good news I got in 2015 is I wasn't part of this breach. Yeah, she's glad about that. I gave a similar talk at NIST this morning. We had about 1,000 people in the auditorium, and as I rolled these things out, I said, "How many people were part of the OPM breach?" And the whole place raised their hand, because we have a lot of federal employees there. "How many people were part of the Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield?" Oh, about half the things raised their hands. And I came, "How many were part of the Ashley Madison breach?" And not a hand was raised in the whole place. I said, "That's good. You guys are catching on quick." 2016, F35, one of our most advanced tactical fighters. It's been in the works for years. One of our defense contractors and one of our allies, I won't mention which one, they got into the contractor's facility and they stole the design documentation for the F-35. Now, I'll tell you, if you're an Air Force pilot and that situation happened, what is the adversary going to do with that? They're going to build their own, maybe cheaper than ours. But they're also going to start building countermeasures for that aircraft. Now, we're putting our young pilots into these aircraft, sending them out into combat operations, and now those systems that we spent years in R&D on have been compromised through one single cyber attack. You can't put a price tag on this stuff. It's almost indescribable, the things that are happening, and we can do better. That's the positive note. 2017, you'll recognize this one. 143 million. Anybody remember that number? Equifax. You see, now it's getting a little more serious. That's about half the American population, getting close to it. You see, today the digital world is affecting everybody in every walk of life. Federal, state, local, private sector, international, because we're all using computing technology. And the last example I'll use is a 28. This happened just recently. I was working with the chief of naval operations, and the adversary got into a subcontractor working for one of our defense contractors, and they stole the Navy's advanced high technology submarine information. This is the equivalent of stealing the stealth technology from the Air Force 20 years ago. What they were doing is they were building the next generation submarine technology, which makes them stealthy. They're invisible to radar. And we have those in the airplanes, and now other countries have those too, because technology eventually gets out to everybody, and you only have that advantage for so long. That's all gone now. And how many millions and trillions of dollars overall with the lifespan of that program? It's just heartbreaking. And I was working with the chief of naval operations and their staff and trying to figure out how are we going to fix this problem before it's too late. So I'm a huge fan of NASA, as you know. I talked about the space program and the great moonshot and all that. This is what always happens when something goes wrong at NASA. So I use this slide to indicate, Houston, we have a problem. And we have to come together to fix this thing that we call our devastating cyber attacks today. And this is really, it says it all. You know, we have to start getting more serious about our critical assets and use the great minds that are sitting out here in this audience today, faculty and students alike. That's that essential partnership that I talked about, bringing government, industry, and academia together to do a 2018 version of the old moonshot. It's that difficult a problem. But there's nothing that we can't solve as Americans, because we've faced a whole bunch of problems that are a lot more difficult than this over our history, and we've never failed in that regard. So how do we defend this thing called cyberspace in the outgoing years? We have to make things simpler. When you look at, I talked about the example before. Do you know the B-1 bomber? I was down yesterday in Georgia at Robins Air Force Base, and I spoke at one of their air museums there. And in the parking lot is a real B-1 bomber. And I said, wow, that's impressive. How'd you get that here? Because it's in the parking lot. And we took it apart, and we had to put it together in the parking lot. So they did that. And the important thing to know is that we have to start building simpler systems. Right now, in the B-1 bomber, there's actually an operating system. And I can tell you it's not Windows 10. What is the operating system? Some of you who may be familiar, it's a kernel-based, very small operating system. It's built by a company called Green Hills. It's highly assured, highly trusted operating system. It doesn't do a bajillion things. It does one thing. It turns on the ignition switch to the aircraft. And that's all it needs to do. When I was at NSA, we used to have a joke. We used to call it the trusted garage door opener. It just does one thing. It opens your garage door and closes it, but it does it with high assurance. It's bulletproof because it only does a very small number of things. And you can see the way we build our systems today, the industry is leading us just the opposite direction. They want operating systems that do everything. Your smartphone, give me 1,000 applications or 1,000,000 applications. That's success for the IT industry. But it's just the opposite for security. We're going the other direction because we can't defend that complexity, pure and simple. It's a physics problem. It's a computer science problem. We were talking today about one of my least favorite courses in computer science was automata theory. I hated it when I was taking it, but I love it now because it's taught me what's computable and what's not computable, what's possible. What complexity theory gives you is at some point that you're building something that you can't trust and you can't defend. So when you know that, you take a different course of action. The question is, are we going to have the will, the cultural will, as a nation, as a world, to reel this stuff back in for things that matter, the critical things? It's the question of our time, actually. It's a very serious question, and there's not a lot of answers. So when you think about protecting systems, when I first started a long, long time ago, it was one thing. We built that castle with a moat around it, and we were trying to make ourselves bulletproof. It was all about penetration resistance. And you've seen all these things, your passwords, your two-factor authentication, encryption, your access controls. Those are all functional things that are on these devices and systems that help stop the bad guys at the front door. But we've collected reams, legions of attack data over the last 2 decades that tell us about 10% of the cyber attacks are always going to get through our best defenses with those standard functions that we deploy. So what do you do then when the adversary's inside your house? Well, they can burn the house down, which happens a lot. That's what happened at OPM. They stole all 22 million records. Or once they're in the house, you can make it very difficult for them to get around in the house. So we call that limiting the damage they can do. And the example is you're out there on your computer and someone sends you an email attachment and you open it up like most of us do. Or someone sends you a cool web link and you click on the link. Now, in a nanosecond, malicious code is transferred from that click on the link or the opening attachment right to your computer, your desktop, or your device. And if that device is connected to everything else in the network, it's going to spread like wildfire throughout that whole network. And this happened in Washington, D.C. to the Department of Justice about 10 years ago. One employee at lunchtime was surfing the net. They brought in some malicious code, and it spread throughout the entire DOJ network, and it brought down the entire federal agency in one fell swoop. Hard to believe that we're that fragile, but it's true story. So limiting the damage, how do you do that? Well, there's something called domain separation. We talk about critical assets and everything else. We don't have to build our systems as one big flat file. If you want a good example, many of you have safe deposit boxes. Now, I bet the folks who have safe deposit boxes out here in the audience also have locks on their front doors, just like I do. But I have, some of my stuff is so valuable, my baseball card collection, things like that, important papers, that I moved to the safe deposit box. That's a separate domain. It's a stronger domain. It requires going to the bank, checking in, getting the 2 keys, getting the guy to open the vault, 2 keys in the thing, like the Cheyenne Mountain launching the nukes. It's a lot of work, but it's a stronger, more secure domain. We can build our systems like that. We can make it very difficult. When the adversary shoves that initial malicious code through your perimeter, it can stop it in its tracks, and you can make it very difficult for the adversary to move laterally across that system by doing network segmentation, domain separation. You basically move your critical stuff into that safe deposit box. Now, the other way we can do it is through time. You know, adversaries have to get in. They need time. They need to understand where they are, and they have to kind of get comfortable with their environment. Then they go after the target. We can use virtualization techniques. Now, the computer scientists know what virtual machines are. For those of you who are not computer scientists, it's a view of the computer that gives, you think the computer is all yours. Everything you're doing looks like you're the only person in that system. But in reality, you're just one virtual machine, one view of that entire big system. And we can spawn those virtual machines up in thousands. The good news is if malicious code gets into one of those virtual machines, when that virtual machine goes away, guess what? So does all that malicious code. And now our researchers are figuring out how to do micro-virtualization, where we're able to virtualize smaller and smaller pieces of that system. And what's that going to do? That means when the adversary gets in, it's going to be total chaos from their perspective. They're not going to understand where they are, how to advance, and basically it shuts down the attack right there at the front door. You see, that's innovation. Simplify, innovate, and automate. Those are the 3 simple words that are very difficult. Now, we're not there yet, but it won't be too long. It'll be certainly within your lifetime when this cyber attack situation will be under control. The question is, are we going to survive long enough to get to that point? That's the real question. Make the system resilient. Systems have to operate under stress. And that means that power plant, even if it gets hit by a cyber attack, has to be able to continue to operate, even if it's in a degraded state. Maybe it can provide power only to 80% of the grid instead of 100%. That's okay. But if it goes down completely, we have big problems. And so resiliency is the word you're going to hear a lot about going forward in the future. And it's all wrapped together as part of a coordinated, holistic strategy. That's what you're going to learn here in these programs that you're in cybersecurity. You're going to learn more than just being a Microsoft network engineer. You get a certificate for that, and that's good. You can get a good job. But you all are going to understand how these systems are built. You're going to ask the important questions. You're going to be critical thinkers. You are going to be the ones that come forward and design solutions that we can trust in the future. That's why you pick the right program, and that's why you pick the right school, because there's a lot of your peers that are just too busy with their heads down, their smartphones and their tablets, and this whole revolution is just bypassing them. You will be part of the solution, and that's pretty awesome. Well, cyber resilience, I mentioned that's just kind of a classic definition. Again, it's not that important to understand, except it's about survival at the end of the day. Now, some of you who are not in computer science, and there's a lot of other disciplines in colleges and universities that are very much related to security. Safety is the big one. Do you realize about 75% of what safety engineers do overlaps with what security people do? I learned that when I went up to Boston, Massachusetts, one of the largest chip manufacturers in the country, and I talked to their safety folks, and they said, you know, all the stuff that you're putting out at NIST and your security stuff, we do all that. 75% of it, that's good news. That means they're 75% of the way there. All they have to do is add on the last 25%. So those are some of the things that you may find other people who are studying related disciplines. You're all going to be working on the same problem, basically, and they all can be complementary disciplines. So this isn't, hey, I'm in computer science and I'm the cyber guy or gal. Cybersecurity is going to draw on many, many different disciplines: mathematics, computer engineering, software engineering, computer science. And there's also many opportunities. If you're not into the bits and bytes, you can be in the policy end of the house, because cybersecurity has a place for everybody. And you have to find your niche. And you have to be passionate and then go forward and do great stuff. And that's what it's all about today. I talked about redoing how we do our systems. This is a classic engineer's view of systems. And again, if you're not an engineer, these things won't mean a lot, but you can kind of get a sense of what's going on there. I got a really good question from one of the faculty. It might have been a very young faculty person or a very old student. I can't remember which it was today. But it was a very good question. The question was, how do you go into the boardroom where they're all talking about cyber, they're all huddled up and talking about cyber, how do you translate that gaggle of people talking about cyber, how do you translate that to your projects and your portfolios and all the real work that's going on in the organization? It just so happens we just finished a special publication at NIST that deals with that. And it involves the first three elements of this life cycle. It's about engaging the stakeholders. Those are the mission and business owners. And every organization has those. They're the people who are responsible for the care and feeding of the organization. They're the visionaries. They're going to talk about what's the next greatest business opportunity in Silicon Valley, or what's the next weapon system we're going to build at the Pentagon. All those stakeholders have to be involved in cybersecurity early, because otherwise they don't take ownership of the problem. And you end up having system owners down at the other end of the tail there that are just not able to do the right thing because they don't have enough funding or resources to do the right thing. And so the days of turning to the CISO or the CIO and blaming them for a cyber attack, those days are over. It's now about accountability and responsibility at the highest levels of the organization. And that's an important thing for everybody to remember. So that's our life cycle, and that's a very important thing. We're trying to achieve, to get into the black box, I need to know more about what's in the black box. And that's why these three words are critical to our future success. Transparency, traceability, lead to greater trust. And that means I have to understand a little bit more about what those great vendors of ours are putting in that black box. Show me your process. Show me how you've minimized your functions so I'm not hanging out there with all these unnecessary things. We have to energize the industry to be better partners in this whole thing we're building out there in this whole complex world. We have to have a value proposition for trustworthiness, so we just don't value the next greatest application for your smartphone. We actually value security and trustworthiness of those systems. And the best example I can use is the automobile. My first car, about 50 years ago, it barely had a seatbelt. And then I got my first new car when I graduated from the military academy, and I had an option. I could have either an airbag, they were optional back then, or an 8-track stereo player. Now, I'm going to translate that for you folks who are millennials or younger. That's how we used to listen to music. I chose the 8-track because, second lieutenants didn't need airbags. We were bulletproof. But if you look at how the automobile industry has progressed over the years, the airbags went from optional. Now those are standard features. You have seat belts, airbags. The engine compartment drops down, and so it doesn't come back and hit the passenger or the driver. We have steel reinforced doors. We have all those sensors in every part of that car that are telling you, don't change lanes, you're going too fast, you're stopping the car. We even have autonomous vehicles now that will drive you to the store if you're gutsy enough to get into that passenger seat without a driver. I'm not doing that yet because I know how that software is built. And that's the world that we're building today. So, we have to have industry step up in the same way. How do we get safer cars? Partly through regulation. And I'm not advocating regulation, but we had partly regulation and partly automobile manufacturers wanted to give you and me, their customers, safer cars. Airplane manufacturers don't like airplanes falling out of the sky. It doesn't really help business when that happens. So how come our industry, our tech industry, doesn't do the same thing? It's almost like they have a free you get out of jail free card in that regard. We have to do our part as consumers to demand more trustworthiness from these products and systems. And to do that, we have to kind of wean ourselves away from the smartphone and the tablet so we're not totally focused on the technology, but what that technology is doing to us and our children and our grandchildren. It's having huge long-term effects on the culture and everything that we value. So we're already working pretty hard in cyber, and you guys are working pretty hard here in your academics, so we need to work smarter. We need to find a new course that the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. I mentioned the movie Groundhog Day. How many of you, I feel like some days when I go to these meetings in federal agencies on the latest cyber attack, I could just bring out my DVD player and put that movie Groundhog Day on and say, look, you guys are doing this. Let's don't do that again. It's really disheartening when you can see the problem and you can't fix the problem. It's kind of like being in that candy store when you're a kid, and you can't get inside the store, but you can see all the good stuff and you can smell all the candy, and you just can't get to it. We got to work smarter, not harder. Institutionalizing and operationalizing, they're two different things. Today, our cyber units are in every organization, but they're sitting in a little room by themselves down the hall. They're the cyber guys, the cyber team. We need to bring those folks out of that little closet, and we need to bring them into every aspect of an organization that we do routinely every day. I'm going to give you just 4. Enterprise architecture. You have enterprise architect designing all this technology. Let's move some of those security professionals, some of them graduating from this college, let's move them in to sit next to the enterprise architect. So when they're designing the enterprise architecture, they can build a security architecture right there, right at that time. Let's move them into the acquisition process. So when you go out to procurements and you want to send an RFP out with all those requirements, let's put a security person there so you have security requirements going out in that same RFP. Let's move them into the systems engineering world. The engineers know how to build stuff. We sent a man to the moon many times. We just have to bring our security expertise and sit side by side and work in that same integrated project team that got us to the moon. That's what NASA's all about, the integrated project team. Lots of different skill sets working for one common objective. These 3 things have nothing to do with cybersecurity, but they have everything to do with cybersecurity. Somebody asked me one time, what are the 3 things that you could talk about that are the most important things in building a good cybersecurity program? And I thought about it for a while, and these are the 3 things that I put up there. Because without good leadership and governance and accountability, not just in cyber, but anything you want to do that you want to be successful at, in anything that's highly successful, whether it's a Silicon Valley company or a military unit or a university, a college university, you always find these 3 characteristics that are there on steroids. They're just strong leaders, lots of good governance, and they step up to the plate and they're accountable for their actions. They really kind of roll off the tongue very easily, but you can tell when there's a cyber attack in DC, man, they're scattering like chickens in the barnyard. Nobody wants to be around. Nobody wants to be held accountable, and that's not good. The essential partnership, I bring this back to where I started. You are part of the essential partnership. We absolutely cannot solve these problems I brought to you tonight without the great young people that are sitting in this audience tonight. And I might add all of those great professors who are there teaching, mentoring, leading. And what's great about this college is, and you don't get this in a lot of big universities, by the way. I went to a smaller school in West Point. We had 4,400 cadets. Our class size was about 12 to 15 cadets in every class. If you go to Ohio State or Michigan State, you're going to be sitting in an auditorium of 300 or 400 people. And your professor, you may never make eye contact with that professor. Here, your classes are 8 to 10, maybe 12? Your professors know every student. They can mentor them. They can build up a relationship. And that is so critical today when you're trying to impart that body of knowledge from your head to their head. And then get them, it's like a lawnmower. Start the lawnmower and then let it go off and do its thing. But you've got to empower those young people to do great things. That's the next generation, and you guys are off to a great start here with this new program. I'm really, really glad to see that. This is my last slide. It's been a long night, but I bring it back to these three very important words. The most important word of those three is freedom. And this is where I started out earlier. I said this today at NASA, and I said it at NIST this morning. Every morning when I get up, and this is what really drives me every day, I have a passion for what I do. I've been very fortunate to be in this business a long time. I got into it quite by accident, but ever since I got into it, I've never looked back. And when you have that passion, you don't want to retire ever, because there's more work to be done. There's that next challenge ahead. And so every morning I get up and I walk my adorable adopted pit bull, Sophie. We got her out of a Baltimore kill shelter when she was 2 years old. She's actually a Staffordshire Terrier. Connie made me do a DNA test on her, because if you have a pit bull, people don't look at you always with kind, glances. So she's a Staffordshire Terrier, 2 years old. She weighed 25 pounds. You could see her bones when we got her. And now she's 55 pounds, and just, the greatest dog in the world. Unconditional love. And in Washington, D.C., I think one of our famous presidents said once, in Washington, D.C., if you want a friend, buy a dog, because you're not getting a lot of friends otherwise. So Sophie is my pride and joy. And every morning I get up and I walk her. Connie walks her most of the time in the morning. But when I walk her in the afternoon, I go out the front door and I take a big, deep breath of freedom. That sounds kind of trite and it sounds kind of cheesy, but that's really what this business is all about. We are so blessed in this great country of ours to have the Constitution and all the freedoms that we have today. And we're wrestling with some of the most challenging and difficult issues that any generation has ever faced, even our greatest generation, World War II. The cyber generation is going to have to solve some very difficult and challenging problems. I got a great question from one of the students. What about privacy? How do you balance privacy and government intrusion into systems? Should the government have the ability to put a backdoor into a Microsoft system so they can get in when they have to? These are big, big issues, and there's no right or wrong answer. There's Fourth Amendment issues. There's privacy issues. The one thing I can tell you, I told this to the students, you have to treasure and guard your freedoms and your individual nature every day of your life, because freedom is extraordinarily difficult to obtain, and it is very easy to lose. And that's really the cybersecurity story. And I want to thank you all for being so patient tonight. Thanks to the college for the wonderful opportunity to meet with the students. Thanks for the wonderful dinner and meeting all the faculty and the trustees. And I'll tell you, I really admire everything, the vision that you are bringing to this college. It's so timely, because when you all graduate out there, there are literally going to be hundreds and thousands of well-paying jobs for you that you're probably going to love so much that you would do them for free, but you're going to make money anyway. And that's a good thing. So thank you very much, and have a great day, folks.